All right, 2 in a row. Welcome to another episode of Talk to Me, Johnny on the Long Road. I had the opportunity to jump on the podcast with Jim, and after our talk, I was like, man, if we get a chance to do the symposium, it'd be great to have him come. He is at the forefront of training youth sports, and for those of you guys, which I imagine is most of you, are in here as strength coaches, influencers, own gyms, and invariably, if you're in that space, you will end up working with kids, and you should work with kids. Why? Because it's by far the biggest influence that we have. If you can bring in, and we were asking questions yesterday about, hey, I have these kids to work with, and how does, how do you get them into a situation for continued athletic success? Do we just throw them into a simple weightlifting program where they're doing nothing but bilateral hip hinging all day? No. Right? Is there a time for that? Yes. And so I thought what Jim does really interesting is he talks about athletic development in terms of movement, not just static positions where we just lift weights. We're not necessarily just training power lifters. Yes, we want people to be strong, but we also want to develop and foster athleticism. Power Athlete's singular goal is to unlock athletic potential, foster and develop athleticism, and make some badass motherfuckers. And nowhere in that is just about speed, strength, and all these key factors, but it has to work within chorus. It just can't be a loud bass drum. It's got to be able to play the whole thing. And so, without further ado, I'll let Jim talk a little bit and introduce himself. So thank you.
Thanks, man. So who works with kids? And when I say kids, like 20 and under. Oh, yes, that's awesome. So what I love about doing this kind of thing is I've been doing this for a long time. I started my career out in like the early 90s. And I feel like I got some people to explain some things to me and to help me out a lot. So now when I get to talk to coaches who are working with kids, whether it's sport coaches or strength and conditioning coaches, I really feel like I can't work with all the kids. So if I can give you even something little to think about, like you're gonna take that back and you're gonna have your kids are gonna have a better experience, and then there's gonna be that ripple effect. So I feel like I'm kind of like, I get to sometimes be the stone that's thrown in. So the IYCA, does anybody know what the IYCA is? All right, so it's called, oh, this is awesome, even better. So it's called the International Youth Conditioning Association, and I just recently took it over a couple years ago. And the idea is that we're trying to create exceptional training experiences for young athletes. And exceptional training experiences for young athletes kind of has to encompass 3 different things. So we break things up into 3 groups. You got to be really good at training, so the science part and actually training stuff. You've got to be really good at coaching, and that's very different than the science. So you've got the science, and then you've got the art, and then the third part of it, or the third pillar, I guess I'll call it, is business. And a lot of people don't want to talk about that because it's money, and it's like, well, that's not training and that's not deadlifting. But if you don't run a successful business, there was somebody here talking about it yesterday. If you don't run a successful business, then you can't make an impact on anybody. And the more successful your business is, the more, and it doesn't have to just be money, but the more money you make, then you can hire more people that can make a bigger impact. Or if you're making enough money, then you can bring those kids in that were on the street playing, because now you have the resources to maybe do something else. So while some people poo-poo business stuff, I think it's like the lifeblood of what we can do to impact people, because it allows you to do more things, just as your Wade's Army allows you to do good things. Like your business can actually do good things. It doesn't always have to be a nonprofit situation. So that's my background is I was a college strength and conditioning coach, and then in 2002 we opened up a training center outside of Detroit called Total Performance Training Center, and we've been running that since 2002, and things have changed dramatically since then. In 2002, we were literally trying to explain to people what we did, because people would come by or hear about what we were doing, and we had to educate people, like, what is sports performance training, or what is strength and conditioning? They didn't know, and today, if you open up a sports performance place or you put strength and conditioning up on your shingle, people get it. Like you don't have to educate parents about what it is. Now you just have to prove that you're the right choice. So things have changed quite dramatically.
How do you sell what you do versus somebody that puts up on the sign sport-specific training? And I know we discussed this, and you guys know how I feel about this. but it seems like everywhere I look these days, it's like, oh, we're doing sport-specific training, and I think it's hilarious because I don't really believe you can do sport-specific training in an actual training room, weight room environment. Sport-specific training usually happens on the field when you're playing your sport within practice. But how do you dispel that myth? How do you go out and kind of combat that? Because all of a sudden somebody throws out a bunch of speed ladders and like, oh, we're doing speed work. We're doing sport-specific training.
Yeah, so that's been the trend now over the last, I'll say like 4 or 5 years is people are really pushing the sport-specific training, especially, I mean, it's always, the sports specificity thing has been out there for a long time, but more and more coaches have realized that they can make money doing like private lessons. So you've got private lessons for soccer technical training and for football and for volleyball training and baseball hitters and or batting instructors and pitching instructors. So that whole industry has really exploded. And what we try to explain to parents, and a lot of times unfortunately they look at it like we're selling them something, but really what we try to explain is all the science shows that that parents who put their kids into just working on the sports skills, what that does is it gives them like that instant gratification. They get to see like, oh, my kid took this lesson and he went and hit 3 for 4 this weekend because he changed something. So the parents look at it as like, well, that must be what's important because we can see the difference on the field or on the court like almost immediately. But what they don't understand is the whole concept of delayed gratification, and that the athletes who work on fundamental motor skills and developing a wider base end up having a higher ceiling. And there was a study just, I think it was last year that came out, we were just talking about this, that they interviewed or did a survey on like hundreds of like gold medalists and world champions. And what they found was that almost across the board, the ones who actually won and that were the best started training specifically for their sport at a higher age. It was past 14 years old. Before 14, they were still training really hard, but it was at a lot of other things. So they're putting a lot of hours in doing stuff similar to kind of what your background was too.
Yeah, I mean, well, there has to be periodization. And I know periodization is kind of, was a dirty word, and then people got it back. I mean, you hear it in different ways. But if you think about the way that the sports are played, and we run into this here because, I mean, my little girls are 6, and they got approached to play on some, like, club soccer team, travel, and I'm like, whoa, whoa. There has to be periodization. And I remember, like, you play football, you play basketball, you play baseball, you do a bunch of different things, and you kind of go through the seasons. And now with, I want my kid to get good at baseball, so he's going to play baseball year round. Or my daughter's good at volleyball, so she's going to play on all these different volleyball tournaments. And it's just, to me, it's repetitive motor patterns, and it doesn't do anything to develop skills outside. And I mean, and if you look at NFL players, I mean, they've done this study every year in the draft. They always ask, like, every guy, how many sports do you play in high school? Oh, you played 3 sports. Did you ever specialize? No. And it's just this universal deal of kind of there has to be some periodization. If you played football all year round, how good would you be? Not nearly as good as you can from all the other stuff. And it just, all the guys that I knew that were really high-level performers were really good at something else. It just so happened that those skills lended claim to being able to play football.
Yeah, so the IYCA, to get back to that, is all about developing overall athletes, and through an educational process, through courses and certifications and live events, teaching you guys and teaching sport coaches how to develop more well-rounded athletes and to understand the concept of like a long-term athlete development model versus just sport specificity. And to be really good at what you're doing, and I did kind of want to talk about that too, is that I feel like a lot of people today have seen, kind of like the sport coaches have latched on to, oh, I can do lessons, I can make money, like I'm a coach in this soccer club or whatever I'm doing, I can do lessons on the side. I feel like a lot of strength coaches have decided like, oh, well, that'd be easy. Like, I'll go train kids too. That'll be easy. And the truth is, it's really, really difficult. And the problem that I'm seeing, and it kind of got addressed yesterday, I don't remember when it was. You'll figure out when it was yesterday. The problem that I'm seeing is that a lot of people get done with, maybe you go to college. You go to college, you get a degree, and you think like, okay, well now I know what I'm talking about. And then you go get a general certification, something that's, like that's well recognized, and you decide like, okay, now I know how to train. And the problem is, you don't. And I can tell my story if we want to go into that, but
let's do it.
Like you think you do, but you don't. And you start training kids, and you haven't learned how to teach speed and agility, and you haven't learned the difference between doing powerlifting or your own training and how to develop a kid. And what ends up happening, it was brought up yesterday, is that there's this burnout rate, and people get out of this business within 4 years. And I think a lot of times it's because everybody wants this instant gratification, kind of like the parents want to see their kids perform really well, really quickly. They want that instant gratification. So do we as coaches. We want to be, on the stage immediately and say, well, I got my college degree, I passed this certification, I can now train kids. Everybody should come to me, I'm awesome. And what happens is you start doing it, and you haven't gotten good enough at it yet. So kids don't get the results that they want, and then the parents don't like what you're doing, and your business starts to suck. And then within 4 years, you're spinning your wheels because you never were really good enough in the first place to train kids, because it's very difficult. It's really difficult. This is a hard business to train kids. And I would really encourage you to get as good as you can by doing extra stuff and learning more about developing athletes. Because somebody once told me, and I think about this all the time if business isn't going well, that if people aren't buying your shit, then maybe, instead of having all these excuses, maybe your shit's not that good. And I know I've had to look in the mirror a bunch of times in my life and realize like, okay, well, maybe people aren't coming in right now because we're not doing a good enough job. And that's the only thing you can control. So I don't want to offend anybody because I was there myself, but like I would encourage you, if you want to train kids, don't just think like, okay, well, I went out and got a weekend certification, now I can start training kids. Like, you better be really good at it if you want to do it for a long period of time. And if you're not good, the consequences of not being awesome are, one, you go out of business, and two, kids may suck and get hurt and have a bad experience and never want to do this again, or they may get out of sports altogether. They may not learn the lessons that they're supposed to learn. So I'll get off my soapbox.
No, it's a soapbox that needs to be stood on. Is there like a point, for example, like where you would transition a kid into more strength and conditioning training? Like, I always sat down, like kind of draw based off of some the Russian training manuals I looked at and said, like athletic development for my kids, it was different orientations. Like I put them in gymnastics at a young age because I thought that was great in terms of changing orientation, tumbling, moving. I like the swim stuff because there's another kind of different change, putting them in water. Also, the amount of loading that you can do in the pool is dramatically greater than anything you can do ground-based. So it helps develop a efficient nervous system and also metabolic system conditioning. And then, through that, then all of a sudden ball and stick games, where now you're looking at hand-eye coordination. And then I encourage my kids to climb and be able to do, it's just trying to make everything fun. And I realize that the minute when it's not fun anymore for my kids, they're done. So I would really ask, how do you add that fun factor? Because it seems like the kids that you're training, if you can disguise training as fun, then they're going to do it, and they're going to want to do it, and they're going to want to be consistent and come back. So how do you balance that? How do you really, it's really just disguising.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think that comes down to, if you think of those 3 pillars that I laid out, that's the coaching. And you can do basic stuff over and over again and make it fun by the way you're interacting with kids. So there's a big difference between, me saying like, okay, today we're gonna do this, and then you just sit there and you're just instructing them and, I don't know, giving them, negative feedback or making it boring. Or you can simply just, talk to them and have fun and do stuff in between sets, and people oftentimes will say like, well, why are you playing games with kids? Why do you insert games? To keep it fun, to keep it interesting. You want kids to have an exceptional experience training with you, because that will keep them coming back for more. And I tell our staff a lot, who has kids that are like school, like high school, middle school, high school age? So, I mean, I guess it could be even younger. When you drop your kid off somewhere, you know, like at a practice or a lesson or something, or if you dropped your kid off at my place, and then an hour later you come back and you open the door, you slide the van door open, your kid gets in, like, what's the first thing that parents ask kids when they get in? What'd you say? How was it?
And what do they say? Fine.
Fine.
No, that's exactly what they say, because I ask my kids every day, how was school? You know what they say? Fine.
Right.
Good. Well, what happened? What did you do? What did you work on? Stuff. So, the fact that he said it is, I don't, any of the stuff, when I take the kids up, I walk them in and I watch. Because I will never be an absentee parent. There might be some weird shit that happens, and I got to go out there and fucking bust some dude's ass. I don't trust anybody. But I mean, that's what parents do. They open up the door, kid runs in, and then they pick him up an hour later because I got a whole bunch of shit to do. I'm like, I'm going to carve out that hour to go watch, and I like to go watch my kids' stuff. But I'm kind of weird like that. But I don't even know what we were talking about. But so the kids come in and jump in and out.
Yeah, so as soon as a kid leaves your training session, gets in the car and says, fine, you're done. You're screwed. Because it's boring. You didn't give the kid something to communicate to his or her parents. So now the parents, if they don't come in and watch, like John was talking about, or know something about the training process, they just assume, like, well, we're not going to do this very long. Like, because if they come in, though, they get in the car and they're like, oh, today John told me to, that we need to go to the grocery store right now and go buy some vegetables. Or, oh, we played this game, I won first place. Or even if it's bad, like, oh, we played this game and I lost, but then Coach John told me this, like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Because parents want their kids to be exposed to positive things and different experiences, and they want to know that their money and time is being spent well, and their feedback is what their kids tell them. So you have to give kids, like almost like talking points, like something to go on when they get in the car, so that they have something, to explain. And that's the art part. That's the coaching part, and it has to be enjoyable. You have to make a connection with kids. I think, just from my experiences, coaching college athletes was easy because they all know how to do stuff. They can all squat, they're strong, they can all bench press and throw things and do that stuff. They're all there. Coaching kids is way more difficult because, like Adam said earlier, you have to have patience. You have to say things a million times. You have to do things over and over. You're teaching kids stuff that you forgot you didn't know at one point in your life. I mean, that's hard. That's hard as a parent. Like I sit there and think, like, sometimes when I have to teach my kids or like high school athletes a lesson, like I think, like, how do you not know this? But then you think back, like, oh, I guess when I was in high school, I didn't know that I should try to do one more rep, or I didn't realize at one point that, when I was doing chin-ups and it got hard, like, I didn't realize, like, oh, maybe I should try to get another one. And that feeling, of how bad it sucks, like, that's going to help me at some point, and maybe I'm going to get another one. Like, they don't know that. And on our first day, taking kids through things, you see it really quickly. Kids don't know how to push themselves. They don't know how to do exercises. They don't understand that, like, they don't know how to write, like, if you're trying to keep records, they don't understand how to write, like, 10 over 60, for 10 reps with 60 pounds. Like I just, literally yesterday, I was in a high school weight room and grabbed a kid's sheet because, you're working on basic stuff. And I picked up the kid's sheet to see which weight, what weight he was using. And I turned to him and I was like, dude, I love you, but I can't even read this. Like, what weight did you use last time? And he was like, I don't know. You know, like, it's like, all right, well, how, you know, you need to, you know, then you have to think back, or, you know, think back to when you were that age, and you have to explain to him, okay, the reason it needs to be legible and you're writing this down is so that next time we can come back and know how many reps you got on each set with what weight on each exercise. Do you memorize that stuff, dude? And he's like, no. You know, well, like, okay, well, that's why we have to write it down, and that's how you can help develop the idea of delayed gratification and incremental progress, which those things are going to be, you know, that's life.
I remember we walked into a weight room in Round Rock, Texas, on a different deal with Fuse, and they had football players in their training, and they had them squatting down to boxes, right? Because they wanted them to squat to depth. I look over, and there's like a 5'4" dude training with like a 6'4" dude, both using the same box. And like, I was kind of, and I went over, asked them, like, so you guys are training partners? Like, yeah. And I'm like, y'all are using the same box? Like, yeah. It's like, think a problem with that? And they were like, no problem whatsoever. So the dude who's tall is basically like squatting as deep as he can't touch this thing, and the other kid is literally just kind of like bouncing, like he's bouncing on a bed. And he's like, yeah, I can barely get 1 rep. He's getting like 40. I'm like, I just, and they could, and I'm like, no, come on, dude. Like, I always think kids are messing with me. And I'm like Aston Kucher's gonna come out from Punked. But I'm like, no, is this a problem? Like, yeah, we just seem like a good training partner. And like, they had no concept of this. And like, that was big for me. I remember thinking like, I was probably this dumb. I probably still am this dumb. But like, nobody had really explained it to him, and the coach hadn't walked over and been like, what's going on here? Like, go get with somebody else. Like, come on. Or like, you know, flip the box or change it. And then first of all, why are we even using boxes? Right? Like, it was really like one of those telling things, and I realized sometimes when you become so educated and you get to such a high level, and then you see things like that, and you're like, man, maybe some people just don't know. Maybe somebody didn't tell them. Maybe it's just they're not trying to be lazy or screwing around. Nobody said anything. And I realize a lot of times with my kids, they're not necessarily doing anything wrong. They just don't know because nobody told them. Like my one daughter, Jamie, doesn't like soccer cleats, so she wanted to wear her Vans, and then she couldn't figure out why she couldn't change direction as fast as the other kids. And I was like, well, it's from the cleats. And she's like, I don't like those. I'm like, well, do you want to change direction faster? She's like, yeah. I'm like, do you want to wear the cleats? She's like, no. I'm like, go out and play. Let's have fun. Because I'm not going to be the parent that's like, you have to wear the shoes to play. Wear whatever shoes you want. Go out there and have fun. Go barefoot. Do whatever you want. And I think as long as you're out there playing and being able to do it and helping these people and like really putting themselves in the best environment, and I realize for the kids, if you can develop the environment and then allow them to go to it, and I learned this from Rafael Ruiz, who you guys are going to hear from, and Raf is one of my oldest friends in the world and trained me for most of my NFL career, and is just an incredible guy in that way, and but just his ability to put people in the best situation to flourish, and realizing like you just set up the parameters in the environment and then make it as appealing as possible, and then just kind of like suck them in and get them to do stuff and move and make it fun, and like it was always within that. And I think with kids, if it looks like work and there isn't any goal and you don't put it in, and like, you know, here and leaderboards, and you start creating all these different environments, and I think as an adult we get to the point where it's like, you know, we can see the long game. You know, there's a reason we joke all the time, I want to play chess, not checkers. Have you ever tried to play chess with kids? No, they want to play checkers. Why? Because there's lots of moves. It's here, it's fast, it takes place. They can only think one move. They're not playing a game to try to figure 10 moves later that I can take, go checkmate. So I think with it, you almost have to put yourself back into the mind of the kid. And the thing that I love about my kids and just children in general is the joy that they get from like the smallest little things. My daughter, like, anybody know what Hatchimals are? Yeah, so my daughter has Hatchimals. She has, let's say, like 20 Hatchimals. Like, she knows their names, they all have a function, they have a specific place in her Hatchimal house, and like we built her a Hatchimal house and like this whole thing, and like I'm just amazed at like the organization and the patterning and the specifics. It just, like, it blows my mind, and I'm just amazed, like I'm so excited by the creativity. So I sometimes think with the training stuff, and I'm sure you do this, allowing the kids to be interactive and help develop some of the stuff. Like, have you ever heard kids like talk about their games at school? like I always ask, like, what games did you guys play? And they'll get into these rules and these games that are so overly complicated. I have no concept of this stuff, but I'm always like, sounds amazing, let's play. And I think allowing them, like for us to set the parameters, set the environment, and then allowing them to have their user input opposed from just coaching and pointing and this. And I think like training kids is 100 times more complicated than adults. And just the reason being is I can explain to an adult being like, here's the deal. If you come train with me, I'm gonna get you stronger, you're gonna lose weight, you're gonna feel better, and like oh, okay. And they can see a transaction. With kids, it's purely emotional, right? How many kids stop playing a sport because the coach was mean to them or they're not having fun? How many guys stop training because it was hard or it wasn't fun or the coach was mean to you? No, because that's life. But for kids, like they're purely within the emotion of things. And that's why like you see joy, like legitimate joy in this, and like they go through it and they don't really kind of turn it off. So as you get into it, I mean, with the kids, like how do you set the environment and how do you like cultivate that? Well,
so maybe this will help a little bit. So another thing that kids do is, have you ever, so for all of us here, you know, like, okay, if I get, I'm just making up a number. If I get 5 reps here, like I've now earned the right to put 5 more pounds on the bar. You know what I mean?
Linear progression.
Yeah, like you're excited about that. Have you ever told a kid, have you ever told like a 13-year-old girl, like, hey, if you get 8 reps here, we get to make it harder next time?
No, she's gonna sandbag. She'd be like, there's no way I'm doing these 8 reps.
They do, they're like, what are you talking about? This already sucks. Like now you're gonna make it suck more.
I'm not helping you suck this more.
Yeah, like, I'm gonna stop. And they don't value that yet because it sucks for them a little bit. And a lot of kids don't even get the concept of like the value of a rep. And I'm gonna go back to one of my mentors, it was Mike Gittleson, who was one of the first strength coaches in America. He was at University of Michigan back in like the 70s. And he talked all the time about the value of 1 rep. And he said, listen, you know, look on a predicted max chart, you know, and he said, if you think about it, if you get, you know, 100 pounds and you got 5 reps with it, you know, your max is whatever, let's say 125. Well, if you get 6 reps, now your max went up 5 pounds. Everybody following me?
Yeah.
And he said, you've got to help kids understand that by getting 1 more rep, like you've got to celebrate that because they just got stronger. And so now you have to,
those charts never worked.
Well, no, they don't work perfectly.
And I'll tell you why. I remember testing rep maxes and being like, okay, if I can do this for 5, I can do this. It never worked. I remember one time I was like, I should be able to squat 800 pounds, dude. I could, yeah. I know, I'm just making a joke. I'm just making a joke.
The point is they got better, okay? So, again, last week, a kid was filling out his sheet, and I said, last time you got, whatever it was, you only got 8, 7, 4 on your things, and you were supposed to get 10, 8, 6, and this time you got 10, 8, 6, and I was like, yes, like, and I was giving him 5, and he looked at me, and he was like, what? I said, you got stronger. Like, you could only do this last time. Now you can do this time. And to certain kids, especially if you take a kid who's not great at lifting, and you know he's not strong, and he's only got like 5s on the bar, like they need to get pumped up to the point where they want to keep lifting to where the bigger weights are on there, and now they feel confident about being in there. Because a lot of kids don't want to lift weights because they suck at it.
Where does shame come in?
Oh my God, I think shame comes in. You mean in a good way or in a bad way?
Well, I was like, as you were saying it, I remember first day I went into lifted weights. I mean, I had the opposite of the Woodsky story. I benched 115, and I had to do reps with 95 pounds, and I couldn't train with my friends because they didn't want to take off 45s. They're all lifting at least 135. So I just maxed out every day until I hit 135, which was 4 days later. Which the physiology kind of makes sense, but I was like so shamed that like I was having to lift weights by myself that I was like, I need to get really stronger just so that like people don't make fun of me. And so shame was like an interesting fact, and I think like we're so afraid today of like putting, you know, like everything's got to be positive in this, and like I'm not saying we shame kids, don't ever do that. But like there is a little bit of, I mean, competitiveness within the groups, and I think that's what's always interesting, especially with kids, and they seem to work better in groups. I always thought it was awkward because I had people, when I owned a gym, wanted me to train their kids one-on-one, and I wouldn't do it. I was like, you can get a group of kids, because what they need to do is, me telling them something is only going to get them so far. Them seeing the other kids do it, and them wanting to feel competitive in that like little bit of like angst or shame that like, I can't do this, but he can. So now I need to work harder to be able to fit within the group. It was such a big thing that, I mean, you guys have heard me tell the story about training at Zangus's. I mean, going over and watching these guys squat 400, 500, 600 pounds, and the older dudes squatting like these massive weights, and you show up and they like make you wait to the very end because they take all the weights off, and as they're taking all the weights off, they're like, you're up. So there was enough weight off the bar for me to lift weights finally after sitting there for like 4 hours. But my job was to rack weights. And like that idea of like, one day I want to be able to train earlier, so I'm going to get stronger, was like, and I don't even know if shame was really the right word for it, but like this feeling of competitiveness. Competition, yeah. Yeah, competition, but like, I'm not good enough today. But you know what, like, instead of just leaving and kicking rocks and being like, me, I'm just going to stay here and I'm going to suck, and one day I'm going to be really strong, and fuck all you people. So how do you get to that? Like, I mean, is it through groups? Is it this? Or, I mean, I always said, man, kids haven't changed, adults have changed. So I don't even know if that's the way that things are coached anymore, you know?
Sometimes they are, but you have to, like, every kid has to be, like, you have to balance what's right for each kid, because the consequence of, like, what's a kid naturally gonna do if there's 200 pounds on the bar and their friend just did it? They're gonna go do it, they're gonna try it. And you always have to remember, you have to think, like, what's the worst case scenario here? And I know a kid in Michigan who was in a PE class that was all football, and the kid had 200 pounds on the bar, and this was a sophomore, like 120-pound kid, and didn't want to be embarrassed, and no coach was in there to explain everyone's going to have their own weights. And this kid got over there and ended up having to have 2 spinal fusions, and the kid will never be the same. Wow. And that not always does it like happen so acutely, but I know kids who were ruined by a high school strength coach, if you want to call him that, who they were just beating the crap out of kids in the name of like toughness, and the kids maybe didn't all get hurt right then, but now they have back pain for the rest of their lives. And if anybody's ever had back pain, like for a long period of time, like you want to make sure no one else deals with that stuff. And they're having, you know, like joint issues and hip problems, you know, so you have to,
there has to be a progression.
There has to be
education in it. And I think a big thing too, especially at least any of the youth athletes we always worked with, was like I was always really big on explaining everything. Like, this is the journey. Like, we're going to start here and it's going to progress, and being able to talk to them, and you repeat it every single day. I don't know that you guys that have kids, I tell my daughters the exact same stuff every day, and like they look at me like they've never heard this before, and I'm like, so you've never heard me about brushing your teeth. Like picking up, like, it's pretty funny. Like, they're like, we brush our teeth? I'm like, oh my God. Like, but like that piece of deal, and I tell them all the time, I'm like, you will never break me. I will never give up. I will forever be on you. There will be never a day where Dad just throws in the towel. I will never give up. I'm too stubborn. I will win this battle. And they're like, okay. And then they come out, they're like, oh, I brushed my teeth. I'm like, let me feel it. It's not wet. Go back in there. But like that piece of like consistency and like, hey, like, I know that they're just brain isn't hardened, not till 25. So then you're basically going through this idea of like constantly reinforcing it, talking and explaining, trying to make it fun. So it's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. And the other thing though is that kids sometimes need consistency. So I think a lot of us, we get so inundated with Instagram and YouTube and all these new ideas, and looking at like we all gravitate towards the advanced training methods, you know, like we want to know what like the pros are doing and stuff like that, but that's not what kids need. Like, kids don't need 50 different squat variations. They need to get good at one thing at a time, and you can make it fun or different simply by changing one thing. So you can change the warm-up every day, and then be like, okay, well now we're gonna go squat and bench press or whatever you're gonna do. And to them, like the next day you do a different warm-up, it was a whole new day to them. Like it doesn't, it's not like you get bored, not them. Like you don't have to change it up for them all the time. You're changing it up because you're bored because you've been doing it for so long. The kids need the consistency and need to get better at something, because if it changes every time, a lot of kids start feeling like, well, I'm not good at any of this. Why are we changing it? Sometimes they question, they're like, are we changing it because I'm not good at the last thing? No, like, you know, so just your approach to it and just tweaking things a little bit changes it up enough for kids. And then your relationship with them and your ability to connect with them and talk in between sets and value them as humans. Like, we're training humans, not robots. And we're not like creating athletes in a petri dish. You know, you have to know what's going on around them. And Brian was talking about stresses. Brian Mann was talking about stresses. And I'll go back to Mike Gittleson, who helped me a lot. His philosophy was, he goes, what I'm the best at is managing stress, all the stresses in a kid's life, and understanding how all those things fit in together. And so he could make adjustments both psychologically and physically based on, like, you know, if you just broke up with your girlfriend of 3 years and you're sucking in science class, like, are you gonna get as much out of that kid that day, or should you change something? But a lot of us run around with, if you don't have that much experience, we run around with a hammer because we know one thing. We know how to get kids strong, for example. And so when you're running around with a hammer, everything looks like a nail, you know? And so you're like, well, screw all that other stuff. Like, we gotta do everything today. You know, it's gotta be this way. But you have to kind of read kids, and you never know what's happening in a kid's life outside. And again, if you're a parent, like, you get that. Like, you get that there are, especially for like high school kids, you really get that you don't know what's happening behind somebody's, you know, behind somebody's eyes. And that could be in life, you know. But when kids come into your place, like, they're not robots. They're not coming in just to train. Something is happening to them. Like, you know, did they just listen to their parents fight the night before? Or did they eat breakfast that morning? Or you know, or maybe they didn't have it. Or are they struggling with something else? Or maybe they just got diagnosed with dyslexia and they think they're dumb now and they're struggling with that. So you have to, like, kind of learn about kids and understand and appreciate them more as humans than just like, well, here's our training plan for today and that's all we're gonna do. And I think that's where being really good at coaching and having different training styles and understanding that allows you to then change the training program for them in a way that's more appropriate for that day. And maybe they need a fun day. You know, maybe that kid like just needs to have some fun that day, and you get a little bit of training in, but that's what they needed on that day. I mean, you probably had the same thing. I've had NFL guys where they didn't show up, and I'll call them and I'll be like, where are you? Like, we're starting now. Oh man, I'm dealing with some stuff. Like, no, get in here, get your ass in here right now. I'll wait for you. And at the end, they're like, man, I needed that. I just needed to get out of my head and like do something fun. You know, like, kids need that same stuff too, and I'm sure you went through those things, you know.
No, I was.
You're perfect.
No, I'm real good on, like, this is my job, this is who I am. Like, I have like one of the ones that blew my mind is I know a guy who was an NFL player. He was in his second year. Was like a mid-round pick. I mean, you know, playing, making the team. Meets some girl, falls in love, quits the NFL because she breaks up with him because he was too emotionally, like, couldn't do the job because he was too emotionally distraught from this breakup. And I was like, wow, you gave up your whole NFL career because, and then I was like, are you married to the girl? Have kids? Like, no, we don't even date anymore. I'm married to somebody else. I was like, what? He's like, that ever happened to you? I'm like, no. I was like, so like for me, I don't know, maybe too many hits to the head like Adam, like that part of my brain got damaged. But I always was very good about separating the business aspect of it. I looked at it like I get up, I go to work, this is my job. My job is to be the best, and I was very good about separating my personal life in this. And when I used to run into guys that were like super emo and all that stuff, I'd be like, dude, you have a job to do. Be successful. And I can always hear my dad like in the back of my head being like, be successful, you know what your job is, like cut everything out, fucking go kick ass. And I think like, you know, kids have that hard time kind of doing it, but as an adult you get older, and a part of being adult is like, shit isn't always gonna work out right. Like there's gonna have stress, you're gonna have all these other things, and you know, and if you allow all of those things to derail your success, then you know what, like you gotta, I mean, I hate to say it, you gotta toughen up, you gotta do something. You have to be able to separate and say, I have a job to do. You know, like how many people have a bad day at work, I'm gonna come home and take it out on my wife and kids. Well, were they the reason you had a bad day at work? Or, you know, what, am I gonna come home and kick my dog? You know, who's so happy to see me, I'll be like, bad dog. Like, no, like at the end of the day, grow the fuck up, take your responsibility, and be the best you can be, and don't let others suffer your shortcomings. So like when I talked to that ex-NFL guy, and I was like, he's like, man, by the time I got my head straight, I tried to go back to the NFL, and I was like, oh yeah, how'd that work? He's like, no, somebody already had my job, I couldn't go back. I was like, yeah, because life is, you know, this one opportunity. You had your opportunity, and because you weren't mentally strong enough, or you allowed something else from your personal life to come in, which I can't really judge people on that, but for me personally, I was like, I would never allow something like that to get in the way of my success. And we always get into this problem with it. So, oh, question. Well, before we get into questions, I wanted Jim to tell a story about China.
So I just got to go over to China for like 10 days. And while I was over there, I realized that things are incredibly different over there. And one of the things that I realized is that kids have a tremendous amount of pressure on them, and parents don't have good relationships with their kids, because at about 4th grade they take a test, and that test, they get one shot at it. There's no like do-overs, and that test puts them into a path that will essentially set the course of their life. And it's an academic test, so from about 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade, like parents are not screwing around anymore. They're not into like having fun with their kids. It's all about like, we must get you to pass this test so that you have a good life. And what has happened is parents, like, they don't interact with their kids. I brought up something about playing, and I thought like, well, you know, from 2 to 5 years old, like you're just gonna play with, you know, you're gonna play with kids and use the fundamental motor skills that I've taught. And they said like, hold on, back up. Like, what do you mean playing? And to make that story short, like I had to do a 20-minute segment and pretend like I was playing with somebody so that they would get how to just play with kids. But one of them then said to me, they're like, hey, that post that you made about the hugging square, and I'll explain it in a second, that was really cool. Like, tell us more about that. So every year, or every day, I walk my kid to school, and when we get to school, there's like a square, you know, drawn on the ground for the playground, and that happens to be where I drop him off, and then he, you know, runs in, and I give him a hug there every day. So last year, on the last day of school, I posted a picture of me giving him a hug on that hugging square and said, like, I've only got 1 more year left. He's my youngest kid, so like, it's gonna be gone someday. And I always think like, when is the last time, or when is the next time the last time you get to do something with your kids? Because, you know, you think back like, oh my God, my kid doesn't sit on my lap anymore, or, you know, oh, I'm not putting food in their mouth anymore. So I always think like, when's the last time gonna be? And so I posted this. And they were like, we don't hug our kids. Yeah. Who said what? Yeah, they don't. And so I explained to them, I was like, this guy that was there, that had me there, he has 2 little kids. And the next day, he came in and he goes, I found a hugging square. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, here, let me show you. I took a picture. And he found a square at the kids' school, and he gave him a hug, and this is how foreign it was to them. His little daughter, who was, I think, in first grade, was like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm going to give you a hug here every day. And she said, is that the school rule now? And he goes, no, it's my rule. And she said, so I have to do this? And think about that. So I started giving everybody hugs in China, and they were the worst hugs. I mean, it's
like this,
like that thing. But it really hit me like kids need that love, and I think it was Brian who was talking about that. That's another thing that we can give to kids. You don't have to hug every single kid, but like a high five or some touch or some positive interaction, kids need that stuff. And Brian talked about how once they get up to college and they're older, that actually is a predictor of success or failure. And you as a coach, you never know when that kid's gonna need it. So even if it's a high five or a fist bump or a bro hug, I taught these little kids the bro hug, and they thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So that was a super impactful experience for me, and I feel like I'm bringing hugs to China now, and so bring hugs and that physical contact to kids whenever you can, because it's a meaningful connection that will then allow you to be a better coach to them, and they'll start to open up and explain more of what's going on in their lives, so that you can then make adjustments like we kind of talked about.
Do we need to get a release or anything for the hugs, in today's field, hey, we're gonna hug. I'm gonna give you this. Have your parents sign this release so they don't think anything's weird. I don't want to get in any trouble. Yeah, the hug waiver.
I mean, it depends what kind of hugs you're giving. That's up to you.
I think I read a research piece that kids' growth, what was it? It was intelligence or growth or something with hugs. It was just kind of an interesting piece. And I remember my dad was always a handshake guy, and I remember. I tried to make him awkward by giving him hugs, and I remember the first time I hugged my dad, he was like, ugh, because that's not how he grew up.
Yeah.
Everything was a handshake. And so finally, after 10 years of me just shooting past the handshake, I would just kind of smush him. And so for my kids, dude, I try to hug them as much as I can. I tell them you'll grow bigger and stronger and faster and be smarter the more hugs you get. So it's pretty funny. Yeah, but no, it's a great story, and it just.
Yes! Yeah!
All right, we got time for
a few questions.
Yeah, a few questions.
Can we get a slower motion hug?
No, maybe later. A couple drinks.
Just real quick, I wanted to make a comment because there's definitely a thread between you and Brian Mann and Tate yesterday, and hearing you guys.
It's almost like this thing was designed in such a way with good people that had good information that were actually insightful and trying to change the world.
Yeah, but
Luke, we did it, man. We stumbled upon it.
The idea that this our role as coaches is not just to design programming, especially with us who work with kids. It's we're examples, right? And we stand in front of them every day, and so our role should be to. I don't I have kids sometimes, and you kind of said it, where they come in and it's clear to me that this isn't a good day for them, and I'm like, what do you want to do today? Let's find something else today, right? Because to force him that day might not be the best decision, but so that's, for me, that's awesome to hear this connection with all these coaches who are wildly successful at what they do, and but then my question is, high school kids, I got sophomores. Soccer players, high school soccer, club soccer, futsal, club soccer, and then they're injured, and then the first thing they drop is me, strength and conditioning. My kid got injured squatting or whatever. So hearing all of you, right, talk and things, John talking about multi-sport athletes are the ones who go on, where's the disconnect? Who's feeding parents this information? How come nobody's checking sport coaches? How is this happening?
Well, I mean, I think it's different for everybody, but that's what we've set up. That's what Facebook is for parents to talk about how many, medals their kid won, and a lot of parents are A lot of parents are, most parents are trying to do what's right for their kid. And so they're just trying to create as much success as they can for their kid. And if, like John said, if a little soccer is good, then more soccer must be better. And we just want our kid to make the team, because if they don't make the team, like, have you ever had a kid get cut from a team? Like, that sucks. And so parents want to avoid that. So they're like, okay, well, we'll go to futsal, and we'll go to, technical training, and we'll go to this, all in the name of, like, don't have any bad experiences for kids.
Also, too, there's the idea that, school's expensive. I'll tell you, getting a scholarship was by far, for me, I got a chance to go to Berkeley. The valedictorian in my high school didn't get to go to Berkeley. And I got to go, and they paid me to go there. Like, that was epic. Like, I really wish I could have got there on my grades, but and I did well, and there was no chance I was getting there. So I think a lot of parents, too, look at it and think, hey, if my kid's really good at this sport, he'll be good for over a whole bunch of time, and then they'll have a chance to go to a really good school and get a scholarship. We've worked with a ton of athletes over the last 9-10 years, and the ones that I count as the biggest successes is when I get emails from coaches that we've worked with where the kid was really good in high school and I was able to get a full ride, and this is for both boys and girls. And for me, when they ask hey, how do you marker success, or how do you feel about your program, I'm like, honestly, if I can help influence a coach who allows a kid to get a scholarship and he gets the gift that I got, I'm good. That's, to me, is that's the biggest success story. I used this training, I used this philosophy, I used this methodology. This kid did better. All of a sudden, he gets a full ride. Now he gets to go to and gets his school paid for. That, to me, is, to be able to take that stress off of the parent. I sat with our financial guy and he was like, oh, these are projections for when your kids go to school. And I was like, wait, how much is that? I was like, that's crazy. They're estimating $250,000 in 10 years to send a kid to a 4-year school. And I'm like, who's going to pay this? What are you going to tell your kid? You're really good at welding, I'm going to send you to trade school. What does this look like? And then as a parent, you want your child to be able to go to a really good school and be able to do these things and however, and you're like, wow, that's a financial, okay, we got to mortgage the house and we're going to pay because they're our kids. Or you're like, I'm going to put you in a little extra futsal and a little soccer, maybe get a soccer scholarship. And that's a really very, very real thing for parents that are like, man, we're going to specialize early. We're going to make sure you're really good so that you have the best opportunity. The issue is that's really short-minded. That's checkers, not chess. That's I didn't start playing football until I was in high school, and the skills that I developed before I got there were the ones that allowed me to play for a really long time in the NFL. And the kids that were all really good at football, they didn't even play varsity. And that is very, very real and apparent. And then to sit around with a bunch of really other good NFL guys. I was sitting there, I was best man at Tony Gonzalez's wedding. Tony was like, I want to play in the NBA. It just so happened that a 6'4" power forward was not nearly as valuable as a 6'4" tight end that plays for 17 years and was the most dominant tight end to ever play the game. And he's like, running into the end zone, boxing a guy out and jumping and catching. And catching a touchdown was a hell of a lot easier than actually, basketball. So seeing those skills and that development, would he have still been Tony Gonzalez if he had just played football? Good, chances are high. And that's also, we talked about professional athletes. The reason being that you can't look at what the professional athletes are doing, or you look at the NFL and say, hey, what's the program the NFL coaches are using with their players? I'm going to adapt that over to kids. Why is that a broken model? Because you're trying to base training off of a bunch of genetic freaks that, unless they got killed in drive-by, would be in the NFL regardless of their training. Your training could look like a snare drum and a shake weight, and that dude's still going to play in the NFL. I'm not kidding you. I played with a guy who literally went home, did nothing for 6 months, and he came back and he benched 565 for a set of 3 in under 4 or 5 seconds. So genetic freaks at the highest point, and that's really what it is. It's the most genetically gifted people on the planet that just so happen to be able to do this. And then we're going to go out and these strength coaches are like, oh yeah, we've been training. You know what the job of a strength coach in the NFL is? Don't hurt your $100 million player. Because if you do, you get fired because you make about $100,000, and this dude's making $10 million a week. So when you look at those training programs, I'm never interested in I don't want to be judged by our successes. Who's the person that nobody gave a chance that you're allowed to go in, that you developed in these things. So I think, yeah, that's all I got.
I think if you have a good relationship with that kid, and the parents know that you really care, you can then make that call to them and say, hey, I heard that whatever, Brenda is hurt, like I'm concerned, and they already know. But if Brenda gets in the car every day and is like, how is training, is fine, they're probably not going to listen to you as much. So you can, if they know, if you have a good relationship with them, then you have a chance to maybe educate them down the road too about all of that stuff.
For me, it's like my kids, these kids, it's easy. They love lifting weights, but it's the parents who are like, weights make them slow, it's dangerous.
Education.
Yeah.
It's education.
That's 1950s.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, or one guy's really good and he doesn't lift for training. So why would a professional?
He's also 12 years old and has a beard like you. True story. I went to college. I didn't even own a razor. Yeah, I grew 2 inches in college. Didn't even own a razor. Didn't even start shaving till I was like 20 years old. So, I mean, I know. Now I still can't grow that thing. So, we're good? All right. Thank you. Talk to me, Johnny, on the long road. Oh.
Sorry. So, amazing discussion. I think a lot of the discussion's been focused on like coaching other kids, but as parents, I'd love your perspective on coaching your own kids. We all know that trying to coach your spouse never really works out very well, or tends to not work out very well. I'm very early in this journey, but I've also figured out like the dynamic with working with your own kids, trying to wear the coach's hat is very different. And so, as John, you always talk about, you want the kids, just let them play, let it be fun, because soon, at one point it might not be fun. On the other side, you talk about the people that are the most successful. They have parents who typically, they regret they think they were too tough on their kids. So there seems to be a balance of let them have fun, but there's times where you just gotta like be tough on them. And so I just want to get both of your thoughts on kind of that dynamic and how you balance those things.
If I figure that out, I'd probably be really successful. I don't know, man. I think with my kids, I like there's a process. They need to do the things that they need to do. Like you have to wake up in the morning, you have to eat breakfast, you have to do this, and I think within the regiment, there's time for play and there's time for work if you're coming home and you're doing stuff. I don't let my kids screw around unless there's time for them to play and do stuff, and we try to have fun activities. I just am very fortunate in that my next door neighbor has a big horse riding school, and she has 50 horses, and I help her and let their horses graze on her land. You guys have got to see our place, and in exchange, my little girls get to ride. And so they love horses. It's really a lot of fun for them, and they do that. It just so happens it's next door, and so when we're at the gym and the shop, I get to actually see them ride horses, which is made moving to Texas by far the best experience in my life. And so I'm not like the obsessive parent over there, because I can see all these horse parents just kind of hang over in the shop, and I know the girls are like, oh, there's my dad over there. And they're like in that big building with his friends banging weights? Yeah, that's them. And, part of the reason we moved here was I wanted my kids to play outside. I wanted them to go outside and climb and run trees and, look at bugs and play and realize what a grub worm and a scorpion, and just be around that type of stuff, because I think kids don't really have a ton of free play. I want them to go make forts and play in here and do this, and not feel like, oh, my kid's outside, I got to watch him or somebody's going to call the police, which happens in Newport Beach all the time. And I was like, man, this isn't the life that I want. So I think, they, at least for my kids and the way we raise them, and the way I was raised, is there was always a very high expectation. I always knew that the expectation of my parents and what I expect from my kids is high. You guys have heard me tell the story about I grew a bunch and I got slow, and we went to do these timed runs, and I got a bad grade in the time runs, and I was so mortified that I asked if I could do extra to try to balance it out, because I didn't want to go home and show my mom that I got a C in PE. There was no way. I was like, how am I going to tell my mom I got a C in PE? This is terrible. So the teacher was like, you can do some extra credit runs. So I would run after school extra credit every week to try to make up more points so I can get an A in PE. Is that normal for a 10 or 11, or I think I was 6th grade, so what are you, 11 years old, 10 years old? Is that normal for a 10-year-old? No, I mean, my mom probably didn't even really care. But I knew the expectation was that my grades had to be a certain deal. She never said it, it was just the expectation. And my parents just always expected a lot from us, and I expect a lot from my kids. I expect for them to do well, I expect for them to be nice, and if they're not polite, when they meet people, they have to look them in the eye, then I tell them, that's not the expectation. This is what you know, being my daughter and being in this environment, this is how you need to act. And, you know, we can have fun and whatever, but you have to be able to understand that. And I think people don't give their kids expectations. And if they do, it's too, you know. So I don't know if that's right or wrong. I just, and I don't say this to them, but I don't want to raise a bunch of little assholes, like a bunch of little jerks. And that's an interesting thing to go through, because, I mean, having worked with kids and stuff, and I see parents all the time with kids that are like really not very well, and the kid doesn't know anywhere. It's the parent who is literally stuck on their phone or not paying attention, not interacting and doing all this. They're so unplugged that their kids just kind of float all over. And in terms of training your spouse, yeah, it's never a good idea. But I think what you have to do is you have to find a trusted person for them to train at. That's why my wife trains with Harry Shaw, who's one of our friends. She goes there. It's perfect. That way I don't have to train her, and I give it to Harry. So find somebody trusted on the spouse. What do you got, anything?
I think you kind of have to let them guide some of the decision making, and then you can give them things to support it, because it has to be their decision. Like if they want to do it, and if they decide to do it, then you can put things in front of them and let them kind of make the, like my son, for example, like he's playing lacrosse. Well, okay, if you want to be a good lacrosse player, here's what you have to do. If you decide not to do those things, then, hey, I'm going to let you suck, and then that's the consequence. You sucked, and I'm not going to tell you you sucked, because you already know. Like, you didn't play well. But I might go back then, or I will go back and say, well, you know what? If you would have done this and would have done this and would have done that, then you can teach them the lessons. Like, you have to allow kids to suck sometimes and feel that.
And fail.
And fail, yeah. But I don't think that you should let it ruin your relationship with the kids, because for every John that went out and, like, you know, succeeded and had that success, there's most other people that aren't going to be professional athletes. And if one thing would have happened, if John would have, I don't know, broken his ankle in his rookie season training camp and gotten cut, like you know, then the whole story changes. So you still have to have that, but you're still going to have a relationship with your parents and your kids, you know. So I think that you have to put as much as you can in front of them, explain to them that their choices have consequences, positive and negative. Let them feel the negative consequences, but then also praise them when they do the right thing so that they want to keep doing the right thing. And at some point, you have to stand back and let them create their own destiny. It's not yours to create for them. So I think you just coach the hell out of them as best you can and do what you think is right for them every day, and still come back and give them a hug, you know.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. All right, we're good.
Now we're done.
Now we're done.
Sorry about that, folks.
Thanks, man.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jim.